If you've been with me throughout this season in several of these devotionals, you probably have taken note that I have spent a great deal of time speaking to you about the parables of Jesus. It's in part because I love the parables. I love how Jesus uses common day illustrations that I think we can understand and relate to in order to teach us something deeper or something more profound about the kingdom or about how we should live our lives. Today I want to share with you yet again another parable of Jesus. And today it's a parable that you're probably a little more familiar with. It's known as the parable of the mustard seed. And I want to share with you again from Mark chapter 4 this time as Jesus teaches us about the power and the parable of the mustard seed. It's recorded for us in Mark chapter 4 beginning in verse 30. And Jesus said, "What can we compare the kingdom of God, or what parable shall we use for it? It is like a grain of mustard seed, which when sown on the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes larger than all the garden plants and puts out large branches, so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." Such a beautiful parable and such an interesting parable for us to think about as Jesus talks about this small grain of a mustard seed that produces this incredible plant or this incredible tree that is larger than all the others found in the garden. Jesus is comparing the kingdom of God to this mustard seed. That is to say that the things of the kingdom, although they may be small, although we may think of them as little, they have an incredible effect. They produce this incredible thing like the tree in the garden. Are you familiar with the human term or the word known as potency? By human definition, when we think of this idea of potency, it is defined as something to cause an effect or change in another. We often think of potency as something that is of such high concentration that a small amount of it will produce a large effect or will have a huge effect on something else. We often think of potency when we think in terms of vitamins or in medication. That is to say that they are of such high concentration or high potency that they have a huge effect. We only need to take a small amount for them to have a large effect upon our health or upon other things. This is in fact what I believe Jesus is teaching us in this parable of the mustard seed. He says it is a small grain, the smallest of all seeds to be found upon earth, yet when it is sown, it produces a plant or a tree that is largest in all the other garden. You know, we should think about the things of the kingdom of God in relationship to what Jesus has taught us here in the parable of mustard seed. Although sometimes they may be small, they can have an incredible effect in our lives and in the lives of others. When we think about our relationship with God, or we think about our impact upon the kingdom, we often think in terms of grand gestures or large sacrifices. We think about what is the greatest thing that I can give up, or what is the most sacrificial gift I can make, or what is the biggest gesture that I can make to express my love and my devotion unto God. But you know, when we think about the things of God and we think about the kingdom of heaven, sometimes the smallest things can have a great effect. Sometimes the tiniest step of faith, sometimes the smallest gift can be received and cause the greatest effect in relationship to God and His kingdom. This is why Jesus taught us that even the smallest cup of water given in His name will not be overlooked. But when it comes to the kingdom of God, it will be received with greatness. You know, can I teach you a math equation that only makes sense in relationship to God? It's math that only makes sense when we think about it in relationship to God. Think about the effort that God is always putting in. God is always putting in 100% of Himself. He never responds in part. When you pray and when God gives and when we receive something from God or when God moves in our world, God is always giving 100% of Himself. He never gives less than anything better than his best. He never gives anything less than his most or less than himself. But when it comes to you and I, because of sin, because of the brokenness in our world, maybe even because of our laziness and our fallen nature, we, unlike God, do not always give 100% of ourselves. But in relationship with God, if we will just give a portion, if we will just give a small gift, if we will just give a small measure of sacrifice, maybe we give 5%, maybe we give 5% of our lives, or 5% of our attention, or 5% of our focus. When we pair that with God's 100%, 5 times 100 is 500. The math is exponential in relationship with God, because God is always giving all of himself. If we will just give a little bit of ourselves, God will use his power to produce an exponential change in our lives. I believe that's the parable that Jesus is teaching us. He says, what can we compare the kingdom of God, or what shall we compare its use to? He says, it is like a grain of mustard seed. When sown in the ground, it's the smallest of all earth. Yet when it is grown, it becomes larger than all the other garden plants. You know, when we work with God and when we partner with God to produce his glory and to produce his fruit in our lives and in the things of the world, the growth is exponential. If we will just give a small measure of faith, if we will just take a small step towards God, he will use that small thing to produce an incredible change in our lives and in his kingdom. I want to encourage you today to think about the things of the kingdom of God, and to think not about what grand gesture can I make, or not how big of a sacrifice can I make, but what is one small thing that you can do today to strengthen your relationship with God? What is one small sacrifice that you can make for another, for the glory of God, that God can then use to produce an incredible change? That God can use, like this mustard seed, to produce an incredible effect. When you are serving for God, when you are living for God, and when you are sacrificing for God, there is no gift too small that God won't receive, that God won't use, and that he won't pour out the full weight of the kingdom of heaven upon to bring about a harvest. And so today I don't want you to be discouraged. I don't want you to be stuck for a moment of thinking, you know what, it's not big enough or it's not enough. Whether I want you to take a moment and say, you know what is one small step that I can take today to move towards God? What is one small thing that I can do to glorify God in my life? And I want you to watch God take that small gift and use it to produce an incredible harvest, not only in your life, but in his kingdom. Isn't it incredible to know that we serve a God who no gift goes unnoticed? No sacrifice goes without. God is never going to look at you and say, you know what, that is not enough. But he's going to take something as small as a mustard seed, and he's going to use it in your life, and he's going to use it for his kingdom, for his glory, to produce a harvest that is worthy of the kingdom of God. So today, what is something you can do? What's a small step? What's a small sacrifice? What's a small gesture that you can do for the glory of God? Let us all be found faithful today.